Alright guys, today we're going to be doing a continuation of the notes for slope. Um, so I'm going to start from the beginning, go over it. I know I've already covered some of this in y'all's classes. That's fine. If I have, then skip ahead to wherever we left off from last class. And you can finish the notes then. But I'm going to start from the beginning. So we have slope. So what is slope? Well, slope goes by many different names. First one we talk about is just rate of change. Okay, and what that is, it is how the dependent variable or y changes in relation to the independent variable. Or x. So essentially it's the change in y divided by the change in x. We also call that delta y divided by delta x. Now that triangle symbol, that means delta. And all that means again is it just means the difference between. So the difference between y divided by the difference between x. So how would that be applied in problems? Well, this table shows the distance that a band marches over time. Is the rate of change in distance with respect to time constant? And what does the rate of change represent? Well, first of all, we need to figure out if it's constant. How do we know if it's constant? Well, we look at the x values. So these are the x values, these are the y. And we look at how the x values change. So to go from 1 to 2, I add 1. To go from 260 to 520, I'm going to add 260. To go from 2 to 3, I add 1. To go from 520 to 780, I add 260. To go from 3 to 4, I add 1. To go from 780 to 1040, I add 260. So first of all, is it constant? Yes, because every time my y increases by 260, my x increases by 1 and vice versa. So we have the same ratio every single time. All right. So is it constant? Yes, it is constant. Now, what does the rate of change represent? Well, remember we're going to take delta y divided by delta x. Well, what is delta y? Well, delta y is this value right here. Delta y is this value right here. It's the 260. Now, it's not 260 plus 260 plus 260. It's just one of the 260s. So my delta y would be 260. Divide that by delta x. Delta x is the 1 over here. Alright, and again, it's just one of them. It's not all of them added together. So my delta y over delta x, my change in y, divided by my change in x, is going to be 260 feet divided by 1 minute. Well, 260 divided by 1 is just 260. And then we would have feet divided by minute. We'd also write that, or we would say that as feet per minute. So it's 260 feet per minute. So the band is marching at a distance of 260 feet per minute. So what does that mean? Well, if it's constant, right? So we'll have a graph, have an origin. This is the x-axis. This is the y-axis. Okay, x value is going to be your time. The y value is going to be your distance. And if it's constant, what it's going to do is it's going to create a straight line. If it wasn't constant, that's where we would see breaks in the lines. So for instance, this right here, this graph below represents the points from example 1. So at 1 minute we're at 260, at 2 minutes we're at 520, at 3 minutes we're at 780, and at 4 minutes we're at 1040. So we can also find the rate of change from this. Now this is how we would do that. We would take the rise divided by the run. The rise being my change in y, the run being my change in x. So again, we're looking at a graph. We have the origin, x-axis, y-axis. Meaning this would be my y-axis, this would be my x-axis, and this is my origin. So we're going to go from this point to this point. So my rise, it says here, it goes up 260 units. Alright, we would write that as positive 260. Since we're going up on the axis, that would be a positive increase. And then we're going right 1 unit. So again, we're going to the right. That's a positive increase, so it would be plus 1. So then we take 260 and divide it by 1, and I would get 260, again, feet per minute. And that's how we would read a graph. Now, what is the slope of each line? So we're looking at this. Alright. So the first thing we're going to do is you find 2 points on the graph. So let's just pick 2 points on this graph. So I'm going to go with this one right here, and then we're going to follow it, and let's go with that one right there. So I found 2 points on the graph. Then I'm going to draw a right triangle. Now I'm going to draw a right triangle to connect the two, and we always want to do, again, rise over run. Alright, so we're going to have my rise, and then my run. There's my right triangle. The third thing I'm going to do is I'm going to label down the rise over the run. And we always want to read from left to right. So in this case, if I'm reading from left to right, is my graph going up or down? Right? So from left to right, my graph is increasing. It's going up. If my graph is going up while we're going from left to right, then we would say that that is a positive slope. And then we're going to do my rise over my run. So I go up 1, 2, so that would be plus 2. And I go right 1, so that would be plus 1. So my rise is plus 2, my run is plus 1. If we take positive 2 divided by positive 1, I'm going to get 2. That is my slope. So do the same thing over here for the next graph. Find 2 points. So we're going to go with this one, and let's follow it. Let's go with this one right here. And draw my right triangle. Again, we're going to go in the y direction first, then we're going to go in the x direction. Rise over run. Now this time, if we're going from left to right, so if we look at it from left to right, we should notice my graph is going in a downward direction. If my graph is going in a downward direction, we call that a negative slope. So if we read it from left to right and it's going up, it's positive. If we read it from left to right and it's going down, it's negative. And if we look here, we do my rise over my run. In the y direction, my rise, I start here and I go down 1, 2, 3. So my rise is going to be negative 3. And then my run, we start here and then we're going to go 1, 2, 3 to the right, which would be in a positive direction. So positive 3. So now I have negative 3 divided by positive 3. 3 divided by 3 is 1. A negative divided by a positive. Remember, that's where we look at our triangle. We have a positive, a negative, and a negative. A negative divided by a positive will give me a negative. So my answer for slope will be negative 1. And now the reason I'm using negative 3 and positive 3 is because think, I went down. Remember, on a vertical line, if I go down, I'm working in a negative direction. If I go up on a vertical line, I'm working in a positive direction. Horizontally, if I go to the right, I'm working in a positive direction. If I go to the left, I'm working in a negative direction. All right. So we always want to read it from left to right. So make sure from left to right, if it's going up, it's going to be a positive slope. So my number here should be positive. If from left to right I'm going in a downward, it should be a negative slope. So my number here for slope should be a negative number. That's what that tells me. A positive slope will have a positive answer for slope, and a negative slope will have a negative answer for slope. So if this doesn't match the graph trend, then you didn't do something right. So remember, if it's going from left to right, if it's going down, it should be negative, and from left to right, if it's going up, it should be positive. Okay, moving on. I suggest pausing the video. I want y'all to try it on your own. I'll give yourself a few minutes to do that. When you're done, unpause the video, and we're going to work through them. Okay. So again, first thing I want to do is find 2 points on the graph. Well, they already gave us 2 points. One right here and one right here. Then we're going to draw my triangle. Okay, we're going to draw my triangle. Now this time, I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to draw my triangle this way. Now we're still going to use rise over run. We still use rise over run. Alright, so we look at the rise first. We look at the change in the y direction first. So in order to go from here to here, because again we're going from left to right, so to go from this point to this point, I start down here and I move up here. I went up 1, 2 times. So my rise would be positive 2. And then my run, right, from left to right, we started here and we went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times to the right, which would be positive 5. So I have positive 2 divided by positive 5. Now, again, you could find a decimal form of that. You could take 2 and divide it by 5 and find a decimal form of that. Or we could just leave it as a fraction. Just leave it as is. So when we're reading a fraction for slope, the number on top, right, tells me how many times to go up or down, and the number on bottom tells me how many times to go right or left. Right, so this is positive 2, meaning I need to go up 2. Positive 5, meaning I need to go right 5. So we could just leave it as that, and my slope would just be 2 divided by 5. Now, what kind of slope is this? Is it a positive or negative? Well, hopefully we figured out that this is a positive slope, because if we look at it from left to right, as it travels, it's going in an upward direction. Now for B, first things first, let's figure out the slope. Is it positive or negative? Well, if we read it from left to right, it's going in a downward direction, which means it should be a negative slope. And again, we're going to find 2 points, so they give us 2 points. Awesome. Draw my right triangle. Y first, X second. Look at my rise over my run. So we started here and I went down this time. I went down 1, 2. So that would be a negative 2 for my change in Y. And then I went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times. 6 times to the right. So that would be plus 6. So negative 2 divided by positive 6. Now, we can take this fraction and we can simplify it down to a simpler form. Right? If you took negative 2 divided by 6, you would get a simpler fraction. Because this is an even number, this is an even number. So both numbers are divisible by 2. So we divide the top by 2, divide the bottom by 2. Okay. Negative 2 divided by 2 would be negative 1. 6 divided by 2 would be 3, giving me a slope of negative 1 over 3. Now what that means is, again, from my starting point, I'm going to go down 1, right 3. So if I were to start here and I go down 1 and right 3, if you notice, I come to another point that falls on that line. Then from that point, I'm going to go down 1, right 3, and I get to my next point. So even though we went from this point to this point, technically, I could have also just gone from here to here. Now notice the ratio is still the same. -2 divided by 6 still simplifies to -1 divided by 3. So my ratio is still the same. Alright, so either one would have been correct. Because if we simplify this correctly, I'm still going to get the same slope. Alright, so do not forget that you can also simplify these fractions. Now that we didn't do that over here because this fraction was already in its simplest form. There is nothing I can divide 2 and 5 by. I can't divide 2 and 5 by the same number. Right? 2 and 5 don't have any numbers in common except for 1. So, slope formula. There is an actual formula that we can use for this. Alright. So, slope is also known as m. So, on your formula sheet that you're going to get for the STAAR test and everything from here on out, you're going to see that m, this formula, m. M stands for slope. So, the slope formula is m equals y sub 2 minus y sub 1 divided by x sub 2 minus x sub 1. Now, I know it sounds confusing. It's really not that hard though. Just understand that you're going to have 2 points, right? And what they're going to do is they're going to give you 2 points. They're going to give you point A and they're going to give you point B. Now point A is going to have an x value and a y value. Now we're going to call point A the first point. So that's going to be x1 and y1. And then point B is going to have an x value and a y value as well. So we'll call that x2 and y2. So all we're doing is we're taking this point minus this number minus this number, the change in your y values, right? The difference between the y values divided by the difference between the x values. So for example, we're going to work on this one right here. Okay, we have -1, 0, and 3, -2. So I'm going to label them. This is point A, this is point B. So -1 would be my x1 value, 0 would be my y1 value, 3 would be my x2 value, and -2 would be my y2 value. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take those, I'm going to plug those into my formula. Remember, my formula is y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. So all I did was I took point A, x1 and y1, point B, x2 and y2. We're just going to plug those in. So we're taking the difference in the y values. So my y values are -2 and 0. So I'm just going to subtract those two. I'm going to take -2 minus 0. And I put them in parentheses, okay? Because that's just y2 minus y1. So put them in the parentheses, and this subtraction sign stays in the middle of them. That way there's no confusion with the signs or anything. Always put them in the parentheses. So we always want to put -2 in parentheses, minus 0 and put it in parentheses. That way there's no confusion for you, and when you plug into a calculator, the calculator won't get confused with the syntax or anything like that. And we recognize this is -2 minus 0. That's going to be divided by the difference in x value. So I'm going to take my second x value, the 3, and subtract the first x value. So again, put them in parentheses. So we're going to have 3 minus -1. I put them in parentheses because it's not 3 minus 1, it's 3 minus negative 1. That way we don't get this confused here. That's why you have to put them in parentheses. Alright? So we have negative 2 minus 0. Well, negative 2 minus 0, right? That's just negative 2, because negative 2 minus nothing would be negative 2. Then for the bottom, 3 minus negative 1. If you have minus a negative, remember that's a keep, change, flip, right? So keep it, change it to a positive, change it to a positive. So that would be 3 plus 1, which would be 4. Both numbers are an even number, right? This is even, this is even. So that means they're both divisible by 2. So we're going to take the top and divide it by 2, take the bottom and divide it by 2. And I'm going to end up getting negative 2 divided by positive 2 is going to be negative 1. 4 divided by 2 is 2. That is my slope, negative 1 over 2. So again, it's really not that hard, guys. As long as you label your points, label them x1, y1. Label them x2, y2. Alright, and then you just subtract the two y's and you subtract the two x's. But you always have to make sure that you're doing the second point minus the first point. Right, it's the second y value minus the first y value, the second x value minus the first x value. So again, we're going to label these. Point 1, point 2. So we have x1, y1, x2, y2. Now what I like to do as well, that makes this a little easier on me, is I just go ahead, okay, I go ahead and I put parentheses in there already. I'm going to make my parentheses. So I have a parentheses minus another parentheses divided by a parentheses minus another parentheses. That way there's no confusion. Okay, and then I'm just going to plug them in. So go back to my formula over here. So I have y2 minus y1. So I'm going to take y2. y2 is the 1. So y2 is 1. So I'm going to plug in 1 for y2. y1 is a negative 2. So I'm going to put the negative 2 here in this parentheses. Okay, x2 is the negative 2. So I'm going to put negative 2 right here. x1 is a negative 2. So I'm going to put negative 2 right here. That's where they go. x2, x1. Remember over here, x2 minus x1. So don't forget to label them. Label them x1, y1, x2, y2. That way you know what you're subtracting. 1 minus negative 2. So again, keep, change, flip. Keep the 1. Change the negative to a positive. Change the negative to a positive. So now I have 1 plus 2, which is 3. Can keep, change, flip. Keep, change, flip. Negative 2 plus 2 would be 0. Now think about this. Can a number be divided by 0? Remember, in all your years of math, you should have learned this by now. You cannot divide by 0. You can divide 0, but you cannot divide a number by 0. That's impossible, right? So what we call this, right, is because you cannot divide by 0, my denominator cannot be 0, then we would say that this is undefined. So if you have a 0 in the denominator, you can't divide by 0, it's impossible, so we call it undefined. Alright, now I want y'all to go ahead and try doing the next two on your own. Pause the video, work on the next two on your own, try to do them. I'll give y'all a few minutes to do that. And then what we're going to do is when I come to class again tomorrow, we're going to work on these two in class. Alright, we're going to work on these two in class. So I want you to go ahead and try to do those on your own. Do the best you can. And we're going to work, and we use those examples in class. And we're going to work on them tomorrow. I'm going to pick a couple people to show the work on to me on the board, alright? Okay, for this next one, real quick here. Remember, we already kind of talked about this. Positive slope. We always want to read from left to right. And if it's going upwards in a positive direction, that's a positive. So from left to right, my graph should be going up. That's positive. A negative slope, if we read it from left to right, it should be going downwards. Alright, so left to right, it's going down. Zero slope. A zero slope means that you have 0 divided by some number. Alright, 0 divided by some number. Now what that means is that there's no rise. There's only run, right? So there's never any rise, which means it's never increasing up or down. It's only going left to right. It's never increasing by an up or down. Okay? And what that's going to look like is just going to be a horizontal line. That's a zero slope. So if you see a horizontal line, that's zero slope. Undefined slope. So that's what we were talking about before. We had 3 divided by 0, right? That was undefined. So if you have a number divided by 0, okay, if you have a number divided by 0, that's impossible to do. You can't do that. Well, what that means is that there's no run, right? It's not moving in the X or Y direction. It's only moving, it's not moving in the X direction. It's only moving in the Y direction. So that means it's just going to be a vertical line going straight up and down. That's an undefined slope. Alright. Now we do have a little trick that I used to use when I was younger, and that I think still works for y'all, and I think is good, is we drew a face with this. Alright. So if you have a slope going in that direction, that's a positive. If you have a slope going like this, that's a negative. Right? If we have a slope going like this, that would be undefined. And a slope going like this would be 0. And if y'all notice, it makes a little face. So what do I call this? Well, I call this slope man, slope guy, whatever you want to call him. I call him slope man. So this direction is positive. This looks like this, it's negative. If it's straight up and down, it's undefined. And if it's straight left and right, it's 0. Slope man. Alright, and that's all I got for today. I'll see y'all tomorrow. Please make sure that you do these 2 problems here. We'll be going over those in class, and I'll be picking on a couple random people.